delighted to be joined by Ian Mitchell of Leasehold Services at our legal partner Anthony Gold Law, and I'm really excited about this video because we're going to be looking at the issue of short leases from an investment perspective, because Ian, there's actually quite a lot of interest from landlords and investors in properties with short leases. Could you explain what the investment potential is there?
Absolutely. Increasingly, investors are going to see flats. It's not necessarily disclosed to them at the beginning that the flat has maybe a 60 or 70 year lease. So when they go back to their offices, they get the advice from their legal team that it's a distressed lease that needs extending. So the first thing you're looking at is what's the actual extension premium on that flat. So you ascertain the unimproved long lease value of the flat versus the existing lease value. The lease extension premium will actually lie somewhere in between those two figures. We might be able to give you some guidance on that, but most occasions we'll send you to a professional valuer who'll give you the advice on what you should pay. But typically, if you were to spend, say, £30,000 on a lease extension, you're actually going to enhance the value of the asset by more than that. The reason for that is because the statutory framework on how these things are valued is fairly tenant favourable. You're looking at, so people need to look at the length of the lease. If they're talking to the purchaser, if they're talking to the seller around, who's going to pay for that extension, you need to have a discussion about whether that person has owned the flat for 2 years. If they do, then the investor will want to ensure that a statutory lease extension notice is served by the outgoing seller, and that the benefits and rights under that notice are assigned to them. They can then continue the lease extension process post completion of the purchase, and that will guarantee an extension outcome. They don't have to be at the landlord's mercy for a lease extension if that statutory process is set in motion. If you don't set that process in motion and you acquire the flat, you'll have to wait 2 years before you can actually extend. In that time, the premium is going to increase substantially because the unexpired term will continue to drop, and like night follows day, usually the property market will move again. So as the flat gets more valuable, that will drive up the extension premium. So in terms of who's going to pay for it, well, investors will want a substantial discount if they're going to acquire a flat from somebody without a lease extension, okay? Because they'll have to wait that 2 year period. Invariably, the premium will have gone up. If they can orchestrate the extension around the actual conveyancing process, and there will be some discussions around a discount on the purchase price. So you want to at least cover the cost of the extension, the professional costs. There are significant professional costs around extending a lease, because invariably you're required to pay both your own costs and the landlord's costs, and their valuation and legal. So that's the lease length issue. Investors are also going to be looking at whether the flat's mortgageable. Okay, so if the lease has got less than say 75 years, in some instances it could be lower. Some lenders will not lend on those flats. So when they're looking at the financing options on low lease flats, it could be a cash purchase option that might not be the buy to let mortgage option on the flats. Investors will also need to consider the service charge that comes with a flat. So in addition to paying a ground rent, possibly, there's always going to be variably there's some form of service charge. You should always ask to see what the service charge was for the past, say, 3-4 years, and you'll be able to tell straight away whether it's reasonable. So the things that should be included in the service charge are the maintenance costs for repairing and maintaining the building, and the insurance costs. There may be some fees for the managing agents. Typically, investors will know what it should cost to insure their part of the buildings. Home insurance is £300-500 per unit. Managing agents' fees, again, it's not going to be. It shouldn't be in the thousands of pounds unless you're in prime central London. It should be in the hundreds of pounds. ground rent should be looked at as well, actually, because what you don't want to do is buy a flat which has a ballooning ground rent. There have been some situations where leaseholders have agreed extensions with adverse ground rent review clauses. So you might find that when you buy the flat, that the ground rent starts off with something like £100 or maybe £250, which seems reasonable. But if you get to the nitty-gritty of the terms of that ground rent provision in the lease, and it says that it doubles every 10 years, you can imagine where that's going to end up.
Quite.
And if you've got a savvy person who's buying that flat off you in 5 years' time, they'll probably walk away when they read a ground rent provision that will result in thousands of pounds being payable on an annual basis to the landlord. So definitely worth looking at that as well. Also look at the condition of the building. So if you're thinking of buying a flat, consider whether you're going to get a large bill for repairs. If the landlord hasn't maintained the building, it may need a new roof. We've had clients who bought flats and they bought a flat, and the next day they get served with a major works notice from the landlord and an advanced service charge bill for 20, 30, 40,000 pounds. It's unexpected. So you can ask the landlord the question before you buy. Your conveyancing solicitor could ask the question: to the freeholder, do they intend to actually carry out major works in the foreseeable future, maybe the next 2 to 3 years? They'll usually tell you. So those are key things that you should look at if you're thinking of buying a residential lease flat.
And you're seeing more and more landlords actually adopting this strategy of buying low lease flats for the investment potential, and presumably, as you mentioned, they're mostly going to be cash purchases. You've got the option to extend the lease and then sell on at a profit to an end user, or you've got the option to extend the lease and then refinance to a buy-to-let mortgage and redeem your cash, essentially. So you've got actually an example of one that you're working on in central London at the moment, and the figures are actually quite staggering, aren't they? Could you just share that one with us?
Absolutely. So I call this making money by moving papers, okay? And we do this for clients. So the example we've got going at the moment, I can't disclose the specifics, but I can give you the general gist of what we're doing. We've got a prime central London flat with 3 years on the lease. And that flat, with its current value is about £700,000. We expect its extended lease value to be about £2 million. Surveyors have given us some guidance on what the appropriate premium is to extend the lease under the leasehold reform legislation. We anticipate, it's always estimated, that the premium is going to be something like £1 million, maybe £900,000. So once the client has, so the client's going to acquire that flat, and they're going to ensure that the person who currently in situ, the seller, is going to serve statutory notice on the landlord to extend. That notice will be assigned to my clients with the ownership of the flat, and then we'll continue the extension process. So they'll pay a negotiated sum to the outgoing vendor, and it'll probably be less than the £700,000 sum I've told you it's worth, because they're a cash buyer negotiating on a distressed asset. It's definitely a buyer's market. So by the time we get the extension on that flat, the client will see an enhancement in the value of the asset by probably £300,000 or £400,000. And it's purely a paper exercise. Some clients in recent similar transactions have actually gone in and done some refurbishment works as well, because usually these flats with low leases will need some refurbishment. And that's
good point. Also
added value. So they go in and you're polishing the asset by extending the lease, polishing it by doing a refurb, high-end refurb in that part of town, and it just makes sense. But there aren't a lot of these things out there. These opportunities, you need to be on the lookout for them.
Absolutely. Well, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing those insights into what is actually a very niche strategy, but if you understand it and find the right properties, it can actually be very lucrative. So a lot of landlords are scared of short leases, but actually we can see that there is investment potential in them if you adopt that niche strategy. So thanks very much for sharing those
No problem.
insights, Ian. Thank you.